Welcome to the second part of this heritage talk on Mercote Marsh and Fosse. So I'm Natasha and I work at Wessex Archaeology. I'm joined by Helen Chittock from AOC Archaeology, part of Connect, and Emma Carter from Wessex Archaeology.
So this site is Cubbington Woods. Cubbington Woods is a really interesting site because much like Fosse, we also had deposits of human bone in the roundhouse. So what are they doing? So let's have a little bit more of a closer look about what's going on in this picture. So these penannular or ring ditches, they are again believed to represent the eaves drip gullies. So that's the basically like the drainage area that forms. Imagine you've got a roundhouse with a thatched roof. It's going to rain a lot because we're in Britain in the Iron Age. The weather still won't be particularly good. And that constant dripping from the roof forms basically a drip gully, and it kind of acts almost as its own kind of guttering there. So it's really important, and that's a kind of an integral feature we find in the construction of roundhouses. So on this site, you can see how numerous they are going across that image there, with some of the ring ditches, so the roundhouses, surviving better than the others. So you may find that some of them are just C-shapes, whereas others are far more complete circles. Oddly, or more usually in fact, there is an absence of internal features such as hearths, structural post holes and floor surfaces. So that can seem strange for such a definitive sign of settlement. However, it's actually quite characteristic for the region. Now, this does make some of the internal hearth elements or sort of internal pits that are found within Fosse, some of the structures there, quite interesting to compare. Now, unlike some of the other sites along the route that we've done where the assemblage can be quite sparse, and unlike Fosse, we actually know quite a bit about what their life was like here, and it's thanks to that artifactual and environmental evidence that we can paint a vibrant picture of daily life in this unique settlement as well. So the settlement is dated to the late Iron Age, so quite similar to Fosse, but actually it does span into the early Romano-British period. So we think from the assemblage around AD 25 to 100. So in use for just 75 years, and also bracketing the Roman invasion, this site has the potential to reveal what life was like at a time of great cultural and socio-political change. Now, it's mentioned that we did find the human bones in that roundhouse, so we need to think about why that's happening. So perhaps if it was Roman invaders, they wished to prove their ownership of the land by interring their dead, or alternatively, if it's the reaction from a farming settlement invaded by new cultures, changing their way of life, changing the way they build things, all those straight roads instead of wobbling ones, they might be attempting to assert a connection back to their old ways and that older way of kind of revering the dead. In either case, we can see the act of including the dead in the roots of your home as a departure from that kind of transient, low occupation, low density lifestyle that we saw during the earlier periods in the Neolithic and the Bronze Age. So set against a rural backdrop, this practice may be linked to the sense of tethering communities to the land and to the plough. Now, in the final site, which we'll look at, is Mercote Marsh. And on this site, unfortunately, no fragments of human bone were found. However, the narrative of Iron Age people managing the landscape for farming and agriculture is further reinforced here. So what can we see in this picture of Mercote Marsh? It's different already in that we know, we can spot immediately that it's not muddy. So the archaeologists are quite lucky as they've had perhaps the best at digging week. But as we can, it's worth pointing out, is that we have signs of ditches there running across. So where you might be able to catch along the sort of centre line going horizontally across the middle of the image, that's a big ditch. And then we have another one going back in the background as well. Yeah, brilliant. So hopefully now we can point out the different colours between the natural geology, which is that red, and then that kind of grey-brown colour of the fill of the features. Okay, so let's have a closer look then. So Mercote Marsh is an enclosed Iron Age rural settlement. It has associated interior features, so some things are happening within sort of the enclosed parts of it. The exterior fill system dates to the to the north and to the east is dated to the late Iron Age period, and the settlement is unlikely to be later than the 2nd century AD. So what's really important that we can look at is that through Fosse, Mercote Marsh, and also Cubbington Woods, we're building up sites in the region that have evidence for communities or settlements focusing on farming and agriculture in the Iron Age period.
So there's quite a lot going on in this map, Emma. I wonder if you could help me break it down.
Yeah, it's pretty intense, isn't it? So that's why the maps often have those really good colour keys. It kind of brings your eye in a little bit quicker. So probably the thing that strikes everyone's eye most might be the kind of structured rectangular features. That's nothing archaeological, but it might be in a few hundred years' time, but those are the trenches that AOC, part of Connect, have dug in the earlier phase of excavation. So when we read this map, we need to discount the things that we've done as modern archaeologists. Either they help us reveal the past, when we want to find out those features, let's discard those trenches. Now, the next thing we can look at is perhaps the most recent thing, is the pink lines going across. So those pink lines are post-medieval ditches. Now, we can get that date either through pottery evidence, but sometimes we do find they actually link up to old maps of the area. So we can look at old Ordnance Survey maps or town plans, or if it's a site like Coleshill, which you can learn more about tomorrow, we'll see that some of the maps are drawn of the landscape, and the field names can help give indications of what those parts of land were used for in the past. But we can also look at the brown colours. So more towards the left-hand side, we've got that kind of that brown, yep, that's it, that brown back to front L shape. So it's actually an Iron Age ditch. And it's these kind of brown colours that start to form our plan of what the site was like during the Iron Age period. Brilliant. So now we're going to have a bit more of a closer look about some of the features we've got on site. So Tash, with the new powers of deduction, reading archaeological features, could you point out to me the unexcavated half of the pit and the left-hand picture? Or is this too tricky?
You're putting me on the spot here, Emma. I think it's this big hole here.
Yeah, so that's the side that the archaeologist has taken out, and what we'll do then is read the section to try and discern how those fill deposits occur, and then the side that they've left in, brilliant. See, Tasha's got it. I will bring her out to the field in no time. So yeah, that grey half that you can see, that's unexcavated, and then the big hole is the side that we've taken out ourselves to try and read the features and discerning what's happening. Now, some of the other features that were involved at Mercote Marsh was a cluster of pits in the central area. So this image on the right there, we've got a cluster of pits, and pit clusters are always quite tantalising for an archaeologist, as they're all in one place. So once you've kind of dug a few of them, you can really get an impact of the landscape and what they're doing there with those pits. We also need to consider what the purpose of those pits potentially might be. So if we were to find large assemblages of pottery and perhaps animal bone that had butchery signs of it, we might infer that it could be a rubbish pit or a refuse pit. Or sometimes those pits might be forming shapes and features, so potentially they could be post holes. Or, as often is the case, we still don't know. So we need to look then for finds and environmental evidence to help give us an idea of what's going on. Now, we've got a bit more information on the finds. Isn't that right, Helen?
Yes, that's right.
Helen? Yeah?
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to very quickly switch over my camera because I'm going to be showing you the finds cam. And what you're going to see...
Exciting.
Yes, it is. What you're going to see is you'll continue to see the image on the screen, but in addition, you're going to be seeing where my face was. You can now see a moving camera, and that's going to allow me to show you some of the finds really close up. So the first finds I'm just going to briefly show you are two pieces of worked flint found at the Iron Age settlement at Fosse, and the worked stone from that site, the flint, was assessed by John Cotton. And John has been able to date and identify these two pieces of worked flint. As Emma mentioned earlier, they both date to the late Mesolithic or early Neolithic periods, making them thousands of years older than the settlement there. So really just demonstrating the longevity of activity in that landscape. So this one here is called a core trimming flake, and it would have once belonged to a core. That's a large nodule of flint from which smaller flakes are struck off to create tools. And this flake itself was then struck from the core in order to create a nice, flat, neat working surface. So this is actually kind of flint working waste, I guess. You can see where I'm turning it on the camera, those grooves running down the middle are where smaller flakes would have been struck from it originally. So that's a core trimming flake, as identified by John Cotton. And then the second example I've got over here, this is a smaller sort of narrow flake or blade, again of the same date as the core trimming flake. And if Natasha could move the slide along, please, then we can see a photo of that one as well. That's great, thank you. And what John identified on this one was that there's a little bit of use wear around the sharp cutting edge, which shows that it had been used during its lifetime, which is really lovely. So I don't think you're going to be able to spot it on here because it really is very fine use wear, but it's definitely there.
Absolutely beautiful.
Right, I'm going to switch the camera back over now.
Have you got some other finds to show us as well, Helen?
I have some of the pottery from Fosse and the quern as well, which I think I'm going to show when the slide with the photos on pops up.
Cool.
Yeah.
One of the other things we also found was this lovely mouse mandible. So Helen, could you take us through what finding a mouse mandible might suggest on site?
So the mouse mandible is amazing. It's, as you can imagine, really tiny. And I think this one was recovered from an environmental sample rather than being excavated by hand because of its really small size. So we know that people in Iron Age Britain were farming arable crops as well as livestock, and they were storing grain and other foodstuffs on site, sometimes in big pits, big storage pits, sometimes in vessels and specialist storage structures. So there would have been a whole range of foodstuffs available, creating a perfect opportunity for mice to come along and take advantage. The first recorded example of the Western house mouse in Britain dates back to the late Bronze Age. So we know that by the time Fosse and Mercote Marsh were occupied, mice were part of that settled life in Britain, inhabiting human settlements where they'd have a really rich food source. So yeah, that's that. I think the mouse would have been doing much as it would be doing in our houses today.
I think that connection to the past is quite important, because often we can look at a mouse mandible and oh, it's just a mouse, but by, as Helen said, connecting it into that past and those earlier landscapes, really start to kind of have the connection to those people, saying like we would also be suffering from the mud, from some mice, and perhaps the rain. So there's kind of instantly a sort of a tangibility to it as well. So environmental evidence plays a huge part in kind of evoking that tangible nature of history. And one of them that we found on quite a few sites is examples of charred hazelnut shells. So hazelnuts can really be easily shelled. You don't need to fire them. So one of the ideas that we like to discuss within archaeology as a wider discipline is why are they burning these hazelnut shells. So debate is still out as to why it's happening, and you can certainly imagine if they're eating some of the nuts and then spitting out the shells, probably going to be sitting around the fire where it's warm. So why wouldn't you throw it down? You might have a mice problem as well if you don't want to encourage them. So all those things kind of help us get an idea of what's going on. But you can sort of imagine them sort of sitting back, and it's a bit like sitting in a pub, isn't it? So you're eating nuts and perhaps drinking a beer. Now, if you go on to the next slide, you'll see that this beer link isn't that tenuous. So one of the things we do find on site as well is hulled barley. So barley can be used for fermentation and for brewing alcohol, but it can also be used as milled down for flour. We do have some evidence along the sites for it being milled down. So Helen mentioned a quernstone, and we'll go into that a little bit later.
Thank you for watching part 2 of this heritage talk on Mercote Marsh and Fosse.